Might be a really intimate group this time. We'll see.
Well, maybe we'll find out. This happened last week. We started with about 20 right at the bottom of the hour, and within a few minutes, everybody else arrived. Welcome, everybody. It's Monday, May 2nd here in Hawaii. Might be Tuesday, May 3rd, where you are. And welcome to the Open Hearted Practice Group. I'm Jim Mansky, and I'm really feeling curious about what will unfold today. Every time I thought I knew what we were going to do, something shifted in me and I changed my mind. And so I really wonder what's going to happen as we co-create this space together today. And it's really rainy here in Maui, and that always gives me, I want to give you the warning that if we disappear, we'll try to come back. But sometimes we get knocked off the internet. And if we can, I can call back in on our cell phone and try to finish up with you. And how are you, Jory?
Well, it has been certainly a stormy day outside, and it's been a busy day inside as well. I've been the ever ready bunny all day, and it's why I asked to do the self connection exercise because I need it more than anybody else, I think. So, um, I'm just glad to be here. And I'm glad Jim is also the ever ready bunny and's got a plan for us all today.
Yeah.
So,
So before we start, let me just, if you're here for the first time and just looking at the list of folks, I think there might be some new people here. So let me just explain. Oh, hey, Frankie, good to see you. Let me explain what we do and how we do it. We're here to practice nonviolent communication, a process developed by Marshall Rosenberg and now shared by hundreds of certified trainers and hundreds of non-certified trainers all around the world. And we've been doing this practice group in some form or another for almost 20 years. And when we practice all three modes of nonviolent communication. The first mode being self-connection or self-empathy. Jory will lead us in an exercise with that in just a few minutes. It's just where we're using nonviolent communication as an inside job to promote self-connection, self-empathy, self-compassion. And then we'll also have the opportunity to practice honesty, which is the expressing part of NVC. NVC being the initials that sometimes we use when we talk about nonviolent communication. And empathy being the listening part of NVC. So we'll do some small group work where you get a chance to practice those two modes. If you don't want to practice, then you could put an equal sign in front of your name. And that helps me when I'm making the groups to divide the groups up so that there's an equal number in each group, more or less. And folks who don't want to practice can be in their own silent library space. So while Jory leads the self-connection exercise, I'll start making the groups. And so the other thing that you could do if you want to practice in a language other than English, you can put that other language in your name as well. And I'll try to make groups if there's at least 2 or 3 people in each group. Okay, I think that's
and
everything.
there tends to be some people who don't speak English as their first language who really appreciate when others will join them in their language. So if you have a particular language that you're equally comfortable in speaking in and you're willing to support the people who speak another language, put that language after your name as well. I'm not actually seeing anyone yet who is, well, Sharona, I bet you'd like a different language if you could. Cantonese, yeah.
Taiwanese or Chinese or Mandarin. Okay,
Mandarin.
so
Okay.
let's go with the self-connection exercise whenever you're ready, Jory, and I'll start making the groups.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you all for being here. Maybe it's later in the day and you've had a full day or lots of things going on. Maybe it's really early in the day, you're just starting. just kind of sink in this moment to what it feels like to have your life having moved around you. Just as you are right now. See what it feels like inside your body. Maybe it feels really calm, maybe it feels jittery. Just give your body permission right now to feel just as it is. Maybe there's a particular place in your body that's calling for attention. You can just take your hand and put it there, maybe around your heart, your belly, wherever it is on your body. Just resting there and giving it some attention, loving attention if you can. Taking a few more breaths in the arriving here. And see if there's any emotion that's arising in you right now. Just check. Maybe it's an emotion that lets you know that your needs are met, or an emotion that seems to be pointing to maybe something's wanting attention. Again, just notice. And think for yourself, what's the best thing that could happen for you having chosen to be here today? You chose to be here. Why? And as you connect to the why, just ask yourself a couple times, and if I had that, what would be the deeper meaning of that? And just allow yourself to settle into whatever the core need might be that's behind all of this, that's actually driving your feelings. And then ask yourself again, and if you had that, what would be the deeper meaning of that? And just check, is there a deeper meaning? Is there a deeper value? And continue to check and take that dive into the deeper meaning until there's this sense of, yes, that's why. That's how you know when you get to that deepest value. Yeah, that. Just notice if you've come to that sort of settling and calm of that knowing. And just savor them. And then consider, what could you do during our time together to support what really matters to you here, those needs that you've connected to? What could you do to support that? Maybe you have a request of yourself. Maybe you have a request of someone else. And then whenever you're ready, if your eyes have been closed, you can go ahead and open them and take a look at this group that you're a part of. You're here and you belong. Notice how it feels inside your body. Notice what you might tell yourself when you consider you consider that you belong here. Just notice whether you really get that, whether you feel comfortable in the sense of belonging, or maybe there's some not quite so sense of belonging and being connected. Notice that. Give yourself permission to feel whatever you feel as you look around. See if you have any other requests of yourself and how you can make the most of our time together. And you'll have an opportunity to actually share with people in your small group, if you choose to go to one shortly, of what's the best thing that could happen choosing to be here today. And Jim has made small groups of probably around 3, and you'll have about 10 minutes. So about 3 minutes each, a minute to just go around, share your names, and although they can see them, but just, just to say hi. And then each person would have about 3 minutes to share how they are right now and what's the best thing that could happen for having arrived here to spend your time. And Jim, you're going to set that up for 10 minutes?
Yep. Yeah, it'll
There'll
be
be
10
9
minutes.
minutes. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I set it for 10 minutes because sometimes it takes a little time to get it all together. There'll be 1 minute at the end. Once it says that breakout rooms are closing, there's still 1 more minute left. You don't have to do anything to come back. You don't have to push any buttons. You can just relax and just enjoy connecting. So that you'll be gone for a total of 11 minutes. Gone from my point of view, not gone from your point of view. And so we'll see you all back here in the big room in 11 minutes. And what you do in the small group is just do what Jory suggested or something else. But the idea is just to introduce yourself, say what's alive in you, especially about what you can do, what kind of requests you can make of yourself to get the most out of our time together. There's a few people who have arrived, so I will add you to groups as soon as I can. It'll just take me just a second. See you in a minute. Okay, Shizuka, I'm having trouble getting you to move. There we go. Here we go. I got room for you.
10, room 10.
Yeah.
Hi, Corey.
Okay, here we are. Chance to practice empathy and honesty with one another. We had our own little small group here. Enjoyed that. And love to hear from anybody who would like to say something to more fully arrive here with the large group. Anybody would like to say anything, you can just raise your hand like Patricia just did. If you don't know how to raise your hand, at the bottom of your screen, there's a smiley face that says reactions, and you can click on that, and there's a little place to raise your hand. Go ahead, Patricia, after you unmute.
Yeah, I am so disturbed right now. Just before coming to this group, I heard on the news that Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. And I have butterflies in my stomach. I want to throw up. I cannot breathe. I'm in a state of panic. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Putting the life of women in jeopardy, the life of girls in jeopardy. I'm besides able to contain myself. And there's no amount of NVC is gonna cure that or make it any different for me. I'm enraged.
I catch it. I catch your rage. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at with what's happening to the United States of America, where I happen to be living.
Yeah. Yeah, catch your hopelessness that anything could really help you feel any better, and it's really not about feeling any better. You're really in your own rage and in your own mourning right now, and really concerned about well-being.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there more?
How much more do you want, Jim? Isn't this enough?
Yeah, I get it.
That's it. I'm speechless.
You're speechless, yeah. Thanks for checking in.
Yeah, thank you, sweetie. And thank you for letting me know what's going on in the world that I missed. I'm sharing some mourning with you.
And Siva?
Uh,
You're muted, Siva.
I'm curious if this this upsetting thing that Patricia is upsetting to Patricia is also related to what I'm feeling with respect to people using my data, using me to for their own purposes to make money, and I don't benefit in any way, shape, or form. So it's like, to me, it's a similar kind of invasion of my privacy in terms of somebody using me, taking away my power.
Yeah. Yeah. You really want to own your power, and you want
right, and my freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freedom.
And some choice about what happens with things that affect you.
I'm wondering if in for anybody, including Patricia, if that's what's going on for you, or you just, I don't want to really get into politics, but this is all about feelings.
Yeah, it's a lot about feelings, and just for clarity, being me, I had to look it up. So I have my my library here with me, my phone, and it's not quite as bad as you might think, Patricia. At least from what I read. Basically, just for clarity, according to CNN, a draft opinion that was written back in February uh, was released by a news organization called Politico. And so what it says here, and then we can kind of move on, I think. In a stunning breach of Supreme Court confidentiality, Politico has obtained what it calls a draft of an opinion written by Justice Samuel Alito that would strike down Roe versus Wade. And the final opinion has not been released, and votes and language can change before opinions are formally released. The opinion in this case is not expected to be published until late in June. So who knows what will happen between now and late in June, especially with this being released. This could cause some interesting ramifications for the process. And let's go to Aviva next, and then we'll finish up with Rob.
So I have a question. How do you use NVC for or how do you know if you should do this? Okay. Let's say you're working with somebody on a program and they mess up. In this case, the Zoom wasn't done right. They're not familiar with it. They didn't give you the pass, whatever. You got in late. You couldn't get the co-host. It's like a prominent thing, right? It's like the city and you, and they were totally unprepared, and you end up getting into your workshop 30 minutes late. This is just one example. Do you say to them, oh, I noticed there was a problem. I think we should talk about this. I feel disappointed. What do you think? Or do you say, would you like to have a conversation about this or not? Or do you just, most people just let things go. They just ignore it and move on. And I'm just wondering, what do you all, what do you recommend if something goes awry in like a collaborative? It's not a close relationship. It's like a work thing, but you don't know when you're going to run up with them again, and you want to keep it good and clean. Like, some people don't like to address conflict. They don't want to dialogue. So what do you think? Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I don't think there is one answer. That for me would really depend on things like what kind of influence do I have in making things more wonderful from now on? Who could I talk to use my influence, and so forth. And then I would, if I decided that I wanted to try to influence, then I would rely on my nonviolent communication skills to try to create a quality of connection. I'd go in with wonder. I would wonder how it was for the other person. I'll bet. I wouldn't be surprised to learn from whoever was coordinating this event that you're talking about that they might have already received some feedback about how needs weren't met and so forth. And so they might need a little empathy. It sounds like you could certainly use some empathy about how it impacted you. And so that's probably where I'd start. I'd start with getting some empathy myself, or using self-empathy to get connected to my own needs, and then follow those needs in order to come up with some strategies that I think might make life more wonderful. Joy, is there anything that you would like to add?
Just the piece of giving yourself a lot of space to sit with those needs makes such a huge difference. We spin and spin otherwise, or we grasp at things, but just keep taking some space and just holding the needs.
And maybe the classes the next 2 weeks might support you and getting clear on your next steps. Today, we're gonna be covering awareness of responsibility, and next week we'll work on systemic change and social change. So maybe between those two lessons, you'll get some inspiration of what you might what you might be led to do. Rob?
I just want to add, it's just about getting to the space where you can really feel the resources coming back rather than that edgy or grasping sort of thing that tends to happen for us when we don't know what to do. And Rob?
Yeah, hi. I'm just celebrating. I got some good empathetical ears in the breakout room, and yeah, just celebrating that my daughter, who lives with me and who's can be emotionally challenged, talked about going to some meetup groups and getting out and having more social interaction, which is very unusual for her in the 2.5 years that she's lived here. And it's like, wow. So, and somebody asked, I think somebody asked me what skills are we using or whatever, but, you know, to really, to put on the back burner that fix-it jackal and presence and acceptance and just being there and going with her flow is the main way I've handled it. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. It's fun to savor your celebration with you. I know that's been a source
Yeah.
of concern, and imagining that you have some hope for well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anybody else? All right. Well, let's all just take a deep breath and dive in. I'm glad that you're here. I think that this particular lesson, I don't know what's going to happen, but maybe it'll help. We'll find out. So let's start by me sharing my screen with you. And we'll do what we usually do at the beginning of each of these classes. And that's just look at the definition of the skill first. So the skill is called awareness of responsibility. We had to make up a word because English doesn't really have a word that was pointing to where we were looking to go when we wrote this skill. Freely choosing one's responses to what shows up in life, owning one's part in what happens, not owning others' parts, and acknowledging that one's actions do influence others. And before we look at the actual pathway, I'd like to just tell a story about this particular skill and how it relates to the rest of the matrix. If you're new to the idea of the matrix, it's this a list of 28 nonviolent communication skills. And we started back in October with presence. And so we've been going systematically one at a time through these skills. And today we're at the 27th skill. And next week we'll do the 28th. But when Jory and I and Jake and Jack, who are the 4 authors of the Matrix, finished the Matrix, we had 27 skills, and it ended with supporting holistic systems. This skill wasn't there. And we took it to our friend, Krista Morph. She's our mentor for Jory and me. She lives here in Maui. She's been doing NVC since about 1988 or 89. She's one of the a group called the Elderberries, which are the certified trainers that have been around longer than anybody else. So we feel really fortunate to have Krista in our life. And also we have another friend here in Maui named Matt Lannis. Hawkeye is what his nickname is. And so we asked them for feedback about our skills matrix. And they looked at it, they spent some time with it, then they came back after a week or so, and independently of each other, they both said, this is really great, but you're missing something. You're missing something about awareness of responsibility. We didn't know what to call it, but that's what we ended up calling it. And so with that context, now I go back to share my screen with you again, and maybe the pathway will make a little bit of sense. So all the skills are laid out with kind of 4 different levels. that you can experience. And it's not a linear system. Everybody can taste these levels at various times in your life. So it's not like some kind of permanent grading system or something like that. But we all start our journey with this particular skill absorbed in a way with what we named victim consciousness, where we don't have any clarity about whose part is whose. And we have a sense that our experience and actions are caused by other people or external forces. An example would be the way that we often talk about emotions. You make me mad, or you hurt my feelings, or the system let me down. These are all giving some sort of external thing some power over us. And I certainly have had that experience and tasted a little bit of it while Patricia was just checking in a little while ago. And so I get it. I get it what it's like. And we're going to explore that in more detail. At some point, though, we become aware of victim consciousness and that how it impacts us and how it might impact our relationships. And we become aware that we actually have more power than maybe we thought we had. But we're still stuck in kind of habitual patterns of guilt, blame, diagnosing others, all the things that Marshall Rosenberg identified as life alienated communication. But with practice, practicing the other 26 skills that came ahead of this, we become more and more capable. And then we can really own our own experience and own the choices that we have. We realize what happens when we get into our old blame and justification and minimizing, and we just learn to let it go more and more often, and we stop taking ownership of other people's feelings. So just like we think that other people can make us feel bad, we might think that we're making somebody else feel bad, and that gets in the way of compassionate giving and receiving. And eventually we might awaken more and more to being able to respond with equanimity, which means staying calm and alert no matter what arises in our lives, that we're grounded and centered. We call it the 0 step. And we take responsibility for being the authors of our own life. Even if we don't necessarily like the story that we're in, we can start taking responsibility for changing the story. And then we're also clear that other people are authoring their story and their lives. And so please.
I'd like to add a little bit of something on that too. You notice that we don't say responsibility, we say response-ability. And the reason why we did that was because the word responsibility often can be held, at least I connected it inside of myself when we did this, as it's my responsibility, I have to. And instead, what we're talking about is the ability to actually make that response without the have to or the should, but to be able to notice that we can make a difference. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jory. So let's just take a minute and consider how we've been educated and how our education has prepared us to be a victim. It was fun for me to research this topic today. It's not a topic that we teach very often. We usually spend most of our time teaching more of the basics. So this is a really advanced topic. And so I was thinking about how did I learn to be how did I become a PhD at being a victim? So I did some research and I found out that there was a lot of support during my childhood in learning victimhood. So we're going to watch this brief video here. For many of you, it'll be a familiar story. I don't know how most people in the West, in Europe and in America have probably heard this Grimm's fairy tale. There are probably similar analogs in other fairy tale traditions, because almost every culture has a fairy tale tradition. And so this takes about 4 minutes to go through, 5 minutes. And as you listen to the story, which is really designed for little kids, so let your little kid come out and imagine that you are a young 4-year-old, very innocent. You don't have any thought about how the world is. You're really living in your innocence, and your brain is wide open to learning and getting educated. And imagine what it would be like to take this in for the very first time.
Gigglebox!
This is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village near a big forest. Her grandmother had made her a beautiful red cloak with a big red hood, which she wore every time she went outside. And so everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother said,
Grandma isn't feeling very well. Will you take this basket of food through the forest to her cottage?
Yes, Mother.
said Little Red Riding Hood.
I sure would love to see Grandma.
She put on her red cloak and she pulled up her red hood and she took the basket of food into the forest.
Remember,
Her mother called after her.
don't talk to any strangers along the way.
I won't.
Little Red Riding Hood promised, and she skipped down the path and into the woods. Little Red Riding Hood did not have to worry about getting lost in the forest, because she knew the way to Grandma's house very well. But along the way, she saw some beautiful wild flowers growing near the path.
I bet Grandma would really love these.
She said to herself, and she stopped to pick a few. Hello, little girl, said a deep growling voice from behind her. Little Red Riding Hood was very startled. She spun around and saw a big bad wolf standing in the shadows between two trees.
Hi.
Said Little Red Riding Hood. She didn't know that the wolf was bad, and she had already forgotten her mother's words about talking to strangers. Where are you going on this fine day? Asked the big bad wolf.
I'm going to my Grandma's cottage on the other side of the forest.
Said Little Red Riding Hood.
She isn't feeling very well, so I'm bringing her this basket of food and these flowers.
What a sweet girl you are, said the big bad wolf. He smiled and showed his mouthful of sharp teeth. The big bad wolf was quite hungry, and he was not interested in the basket of food.
I had better be going.
Said Little Red Riding Hood,
Bye.
and she skipped off down the path. The big bad wolf's stomach grumbled and growled with hunger, and suddenly he had an idea. As quick as he could, he ran through the forest all the way to Grandma's cottage. The sneaky wolf opened the door very quietly and found Grandma asleep in her bed. He picked up the old woman, opened his great big mouth, and he swallowed poor Grandma in one gulp. Then the big bad wolf climbed into the bed and pulled the blanket up to his chin. He put on Grandma's glasses and her nightcap, and he waited for the little girl to arrive with her flowers and basket of food. When Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the cottage, she opened the door quietly and found Grandma lying in bed.
Hello, Grandma.
She said,
Mother told me you weren't feeling well, so I brought some food and some flowers. Do you like them?
"What a sweet little girl you are," said the wolf in his fake grandma voice. "Come closer, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood took a step closer, and she noticed that something looked a little different about Grandma.
My,
She said,
what big eyes you have, Grandma.
"All the better to see you with," said the big bad wolf. "Come closer, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer to the bed.
My,
She said,
what big ears you have, Grandma.
"All the better to hear you with," replied the wolf. "Come closer, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood took one more step closer.
My, what big teeth you have, Grandma.
She said in surprise. All the better to eat you with, growled the big bad wolf. He jumped out of the bed, and as he opened his great big mouth, Little Red Riding Hood shrieked and tried to run, but the hungry wolf grabbed her up and swallowed Little Red Riding Hood in just one gulp. Outside the cottage, a woodsman happened to be walking through the forest when he heard Little Red Riding Hood's shriek of surprise. He hurried inside and he saw the wolf with his huge round belly. The woodsman grabbed the big bad wolf, turned him upside down, and shook him by his feet. Little Red Riding Hood came tumbling out of the wolf's mouth, and Grandma followed. The three of them chased the big bad wolf out of the cottage, out of the forest, and over the hill. The big bad wolf ran for his life and was never seen again. Little Red Riding Hood learned her lesson, and she never, ever talked to strangers again. The end.
Remember to please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you can stay.
So notice how you feel after seeing that tale, that grim fairy tale. And imagine, again, empathizing with a 4-year-old who maybe has never heard that story before. What might be the lesson learned? Yeah, Viva puts the world is against you. This is a grim tale. Janet says, be careful. You can't trust people. The world is unsafe. Don't trust strangers. Wolves are scary. That you have no discernment. Yeah, Siva.
It's interesting to look into names. Which came first? The Grimm's fairy tale? Or, that's just not a random word. It's so fitting. But on the other hand, there's another name, Malcolm Gladwell. And I think he wrote a book called Talking to Strangers. So this topic is really a very, very serious topic, because what parents teach their children, they think they're telling children, don't talk to strangers. What are they teaching? They're teaching fear and hatred. And what looks like hatred, I'm hearing that word on the news all the time, hatred. It's not, it's fear.
Mm.
And parents, we're putting these fears in our children.
Yeah.
And the results are terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Siva. Just a few other comments in the chat here. Some other lessons. There is someone who cares. It's your fault when people take advantage of you. Women are vulnerable, men are perpetrators, and the ones who save women. Messed up gender roles here, and fear of the stranger. Yeah, so there's a lot going on here in this story, and this story is like an archetype of pretty much every fairy tale that exists in every movie that we've ever watched. It has an arc that's very familiar to anybody who enjoys stories. And so this is going back to the slideshow again. This is an exemplar or an example of what Stephen Karpman called the drama triangle. Let me make this a little smaller again. The Karpman drama triangle, because it shows these three socially constructed roles that occur in people on a very common basis, especially in conflict. And since NVC is the language of learning to transcend conflict, I thought it would be interesting for us to take a look at these roles and see what we can do about transforming them based on what we've been learning for the last several months. So think about the protagonists, the various actors in this particular drama of Little Red Riding Hood, and assign roles in your own way. Who's just you don't have to say anything or do anything, then maybe take some notes, but who's the victim in this? Start with the victim. And who's the persecutor? And who's the rescuer? So as Cartman uses Little Red Riding Hood as how he explains this, and this is some of what he says. And I'll read it. I don't like it when people read slides, but since there's a recording, people might not be able to hear this. I'll read it. The heroine starts as a rescuer. The heroine being Little Red Riding Hood. She starts as a rescuer of her sick grandmother when she's going to bring her a basket with food. She also rescues the wolf by giving him indications to find her grandmother's house. The grandmother and the Little Red Riding Hood become victims of the persecuting wolf when the wolf eats both of them. The wolf ends up victim of the lumberjack when he opens up his belly. The story we saw, by the way, was pretty mild compared to the original Grimm version, where it's much more gruesome. This was kind of a sanitized YouTube version of Little Red Riding Hood. It's certainly not the story I heard when I was a kid. The story I heard was much more of a horror story than what we just saw. But the wolf ends up the victim of the lumberjack when he opens his belly, as well as a persecutor of the wolf. The lumberjack is Little Red Riding Hood and Grandma's rescuer by setting them free from the wolf's belly. So what comes up for you when you see that all these different roles, last week we talked about transcending roles, what comes up for you when you see that we can assign these different roles to different people at different times in this particular drama?
I actually, was this meant to be like a rhetorical question?
Go ahead, Aviva, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just noticing that I'm feeling like a tight chest and a I put something in the chat, but just like a strong desire to clarify that when I'm not sure that this is drama. Like when I hear drama, it's like people are sort of choosing to do a certain behavior. And abuse to me is very serious. It's very different. It's very specific. Sometimes an abuser can't even seem to stop themselves, and a victim doesn't know how to get out of an abusive relationship. So I guess that's the main thing that comes up for me. It may not be what you were looking for, but speaking as a social worker who's been licensed to take abused children away from their parents, it is a very specific thing. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think you're right that this particular triangle has lots of different names. According to Wikipedia anyway, Cartman called it the drama triangle, but I think it has been taken as a really powerful model to understand this dynamic, and that there's no doubt that many of us have suffered the trauma of various kinds of abuse. Could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and so forth. All of us have some sort of a trauma. And that's actually why I chose to go to Little Red Riding Hood, because I knew this would probably be a tender subject for people. But if we kind of keep it about this little cartoon character and a fairy tale, hopefully it'll create more of a brave space for us to explore this and to find out where our power is as we go. So thank you, Aviva. And Purva says, the vantage point changes the truth. Each one's truth is different. Everyone is playing more than one role. That's what I noticed too about the story, especially when I'm involved in this triangle. I think I'm the rescuer, but I hear from the other person involved that I'm actually the abuser or the perpetrator or whatever, and vice versa. And so I think we all might have a different view of ourselves than other people involved in a particular situation might have. Corey writes, as a former teacher, I work with several children who had been sexually abused by people and were part of a court case and a big trial. So this tale is one of many with the motivation to protect children and make them aware that not all people can be trusted. That's actually is a necessary part of educating children, in my view, which is very sad. I don't care for the story and use some books written to teach children how to stand up for their needs and tell other adults about other adults' behavior. Makes sense to me. You know, this, I think Grimm's fairy tales, somebody could look it up for me, but it's old. It's a couple 100, 300, 400 years old, a long tradition of fairy tales in Europe. And certainly coming out of a time when we had a really different view, less liberal, we'll call it, not liberal in the political sense, but liberal in the sense of post-Enlightenment. Than we do nowadays with our, especially in the West. And yet we still telling the same story. I'm really glad that Corey, you found other stories that might be more empowering as we go. Let's look at how we might be able to shift things ourselves using what we've learned about nonviolent communication. So let me go back and share my screen with you, and we will refresh ourselves with that drama triangle. So the three roles originally were persecutor, rescuer, and victim. And you can look up Cartman. It's a nice brief Wikipedia article about him. So let's think about, I think we've all played the role of victim. I can't speak for you, but I know I have at various times in my life. So let's examine the costs and benefits of victimhood. So think about it for yourself. Think of a situation in your own life where you might have labeled yourself a victim, or you can maybe think about Little Red Riding Hood, or think of some other story that you enjoy watching on Netflix or whatever, and think of the person who plays the role of the victim in that story. And what are the benefits? In other words, what needs are met from being a victim? If anybody wants to add anything into the chat. The reason I ask it this way is because one of the underlying principles of nonviolent communication is every behavior that we go through is motivated by trying to meet needs. It doesn't mean that we meet needs. So when we play the role of victim, either consciously or unconsciously, it's in the service of some needs. Yeah, so we might be able to take, we might have less responsibility being a victim. So we might be able to, there might be a payoff for having less responsibility. You get to play the right-wrong game. So you might have a sense of power. Yes, people feel sorry for you. You might get love. You might get empathy. You might get connection. It's a tragic way of requesting help. Thanks, Purva. And when I think about our ancestors, we're just becoming human maybe 100,000 years ago, and we're first starting to tell these kinds of stories that there's a need for safety. And so it makes sense that we would tell stories where, maybe the first stories that were told when our languages were first being developed might have been about the dangers of lions and tigers, or snakes, or other groups of humans that we saw as them. Yeah. And sometimes, yeah, as Aviva points out, we actually are the receiver of a terrible of something very terrible, and it may be difficult to even imagine. I don't want anybody to get the impression that there's anything wrong with getting your needs met from whatever role that you play, and that. So thanks for saying that, Aviva.
No, I guess what I mean is actually that you, Dafka, sorry, in Hebrew, that you literally, you are a victim in a situation that is hell and causes hell on your life for many years, and you are not gaining from it. You do not feel benefit. You do not feel nice that you're down and they're up and you're a victim.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an awful.
Yeah, and
awful experience.
that's a really important piece to acknowledge, that something happens that we don't have control over and harm is done. And I think what Jim is pointing to is that if we continue to hold ourselves as a victim of a power under, a one less, we continue to suffer until we can work through whatever happened, and we can move from the "oh, poor me" into a fuller sense of who we are in our own strength.
And that takes a lot of resources. It takes
Absolutely.
probably, depending on the kind of abuse, it would take professional help, like a social worker like you. It would take counseling, maybe therapy of other forms, maybe even residential treatment. All kinds of things can help people to regain some sense of agency, especially after being the victim of a crime or something like that. And go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the flip side, because as I was thinking this through, and I can't remember actually being abused. I was spanked, but basically I came from a loving family, and I didn't experience some of those griefs that some people go through. So when I experienced Little Red Riding Hood, to me, it seemed more like the Little Red Riding Hood was a protagonist who had this issue that she was able to overcome. And I'm seeing also another scenario of Zelensky being, you could say that he's a victim, but he's working his way out of it by being strong. So I think that people can work out of their victimhood if they can find the strength from within to see that as a way to problem solve and actually become a hero in the process.
Yeah.
So that's another way of looking at Little Red Riding Hood.
Yep. I'm in harmony in your.
I mean, I always got the happy ending version. I was I'm from a background of positivity, so I had the happy ending in my stories.
Yeah, in the original Grimm's fairy tale, the wolf is killed by the woodsman, and but then another wolf takes its place, And then that wolf stalks Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood, but Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood have learned their lesson, so they're much more prepared. So they basically trick the second wolf into drowning himself. And so, there's layers upon layers here. And the idea of this question, by the way, is empathy, to awaken empathy for
And-
what's it like to be a person that is eaten by the big bad wolf, whatever the big bad wolf is in people's lives, just to awaken a sense of empathy for them. They haven't done anything wrong. They didn't do anything to deserve this, and they have a birthright to having their needs met, and so they actually have a birthright to our empathy, and that we can find the power to support people that are eaten by big bad wolves, if we can create the political will to do that. So that's the point of this particular question. Jory?
Yeah, and I noticed that Kay had her hand up, and I want to just check again, Kay, to see if there's something important for you to share here for yourself and others.
No, that it was an accident. Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
So here comes the PhD program. How about we empathize with the perpetrator? And we'll just keep it about the big bad wolf here. What needs is he trying to meet? Yes, Eva.
Well, the poor wolf, why is he eating human beings? That's certainly not his natural food.
But that is the question. What is he trying to,
Yeah,
what's the
I
benefit?
mean,
Yeah,
everybody's trying to make a living. Why isn't he eating rabbits, or what is his natural food? It certainly isn't people food.
well, it's meat. Canines they're called obligate carnivores, especially wolves, not so much dogs. Dogs can actually become vegetarians, but many carnivores are obligate meat eaters. So they do need some kind of, and so as you're pointing to the need, they need food. Their behavior, they're not motivated by some kind of moral judgment that some animals deserve, rabbits or whoever, deserve to be eaten. They just need food. And so the benefit for them of acting in certain ways is they get their need for food met. And that once their need for food is met, then they can do the rest of the things that are important for big bad wolves, or wolves, to forget the big bad part, for wolves to do in their life. And there are costs to being the big bad wolf, in terms of you get human beings hunting you practically to the point of extinction, at least in North America. And so behaving in a way where that you're trying to get your need for food met in a way that impacts the dominant species, which in our case is us, then we will do whatever we can to control. We actually call it animal control, and we use lethal force in order to, so that's a definite cost to being a perpetrator, is you can have the death penalty applied to you. But now, what are the costs and the benefits of being?
There's a hand up, Jim.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Sohar.
Yeah, I'm relying on that. A lot of the green fairy tales, and the fact that they're being told to little children. The different images in the story are actually different parts of ourselves, and children can identify with it too as different parts of themselves. And so the wolf is not really a wolf. It can be even doubts that are chasing us when we want to make a choice that will change our life, or when we try to do something that we think that will be a good thing to do, and then the doubt comes and tells us, oh no, it's not a good idea, you better not do it. And I'm sure we all know it, and doubt is just one of the wolves that live inside of us, but I'm sure everybody has this experience that just because of doubts, we decided to not take action of something that we wanted to do. So, and then what happens if we put something as a perpetrator is that we judge him, and then we judge ourselves and we judge our doubts that they're not good, but they're actually coming, probably they're talking because there is fear, and they feel the fear, and they're asking for safety, and they're asking for empathy for the fear. And this is just one example with the doubt. It can be other things, other forces that are alive in us, and that we let them hunt us, and then we judge them in ourselves.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me, that and I think all of these fairy tales in all cultures come from archetypes. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, and Carl Jung talked a lot about these archetypes, and all these archetypes are representative of parts of ourselves. We play all three of these roles in various places in our lives, and bringing that empathy to what's going on for within ourselves when we play any of these roles, then helps us to provide empathy for other people when we see these roles being played by others. So let's just take 1 minute about rescuer. What are the needs? And this is a big one for me. In NVC, we often call this the fix-it jackal. And so this is the part of us that really wants to go in and help. And what are the benefits of this? I'd like to see a few answers in the chat. What are the needs met by playing the role of rescuer? Social justice. You might feel good about yourself. Need to contribute. Yeah. What about costs? What are the costs to this?
Being the rescuer.
Yeah, it can be exhausting, Aviva says.
One could become the victim.
Yeah.
It could be very expensive.
Yeah.
Beth writes. Yeah.
So it could come to the very cost of our own well-being. It can also be costly to our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm constantly if I'm a helicopter parent, which luckily my parents were very kind of freewheeling and letting me explore. We lived in Mayberry, you know, this little bitty town in Georgia, where we had a lot of freedom to go where we want. My parents let us have that freedom, and we tried to give that to our kids as much as we could as well. But I can see how if I'm constantly going in and rescuing my children, that I deprive them of their own agency or power to solve their own problems. I heard a horrifying story to me that Brene Brown tells about, you know, she's a professor in a college, and she's working with, you know, senior level students, and one of her students failed the exam. And so she was going to get a bad grade. And the parent of this 21-year-old kid came in and demanded that Brene Brown change the kid's grade. And so I really catch the need being met, that the parents trying to contribute there and protect their kid from the consequences of a bad grade. And the cost is that the kid doesn't get to learn to stand up for themselves, and perhaps other costs as well. Anything else?
Yeah. I noticed Beth also wrote that the person we're trying to rescue may not appreciate our efforts. That's an important insight as well.
I think that was Faye.
Was that Faye? Yep. that was.
So Mayberry,
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's where Andy Griffith is from. I wasn't really from Mayberry. Mayberry is just kind of a metaphor for a small town Southern life. Anyway, don't want to go back. Don't want to go down that rabbit trail. Might be wolves down
Yeah,
there.
maybe Mayberry sounds like is pointing to small towns,
Yeah.
close-knit towns.
And so I see your hand, Siva, but I'm worried that we won't have time to go to small groups. So I'm going to just ask you to hold it for just a minute while we do this last part before we go to small groups. So let's see what the transformation is possible with nonviolent communication. First, we realize that all three of these are roles: victim, perpetrator, and rescuer. They take something that they make something static. That if I'm a victim, that somehow it becomes a permanent part of my identity, and if I'm a perpetrator, that can become a permanent part of my identity. And the same for rescuer. And if I make this a part of my identity, I deny my humanity, and that I'm a living process, a dynamic process. So what could be possible ways of transforming this labeling into behaviors? So as a victim, I could transform myself into authoring. In other words, I could utilize, without blaming myself or what happened to me, I can utilize what has happened to me to go from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth, if I have a community of support around me. You can't do this on your own. Human beings are social animals, and we really need family, friends, community for support to move from trauma into more power to make choices. And it can take a long time for healing. But as we go through that process, I was a victim of bullying. When I was young, I was a small boy. I was about, I'm always the smallest in my class. And also I was a nerd. I was a smart kid. And so I became especially in junior high school, when for some reason, the big bad wolves come out every day and they wanted to gobble me up. And once, three kids captured me, and I was at the teen canteen, and they actually took me to they made me go up to the second floor of the building, and they hung me out over the and threatened to drop me from my ankles down below as a bullying thing. And I really felt victimized by that. I was really scared, and I never told a single person about it. I was so scared that if I told my parents about this, that they would never let me go back to the teen canteen again. And so I ate it. And I became smaller. And it took me about 10 years to come out of that, until I started to find some sense of authority, inner authority again, and started trusting myself to be able to stand up to big bad wolves. And it was a long process. And I did get community support from friends and family, but they never heard that story. Perpetrators, we, instead of labeling somebody else as a perpetrator, we see this as a challenging event in our life. This isn't my words, by the way. This is I'll give the attribution in a minute. But we, instead of casting somebody in this permanent role as perpetrator, we see their behavior as challenging our well-being. And rather than seeing someone as a rescuer, we see the opportunity for supporting. Either we support somebody else, or somebody else can support us. So we take something that is a noun and we turn it into a verb. And then we start having a sense of more power. And then we create something that transcends the victim triangle. This is the power of TED, the empowerment dynamic, by David Emerald. And he used nouns to describe these. I turned them into gerunds just because I like the action of it. And he had coaching over here for supporting. But I like supporting because it might have different roles other than just being a coach. these
Yeah,
are the
and
tools.
it's also, there's a leveling of the playing field when we use the word supporting.
Right. For me, this encompasses Marshall's idea of mutual education. That we're always focusing on behavior rather than labels, and that we all can flow in various moments to any of these roles, following the living energy of needs. So that's a lot of words today and a lot of fun exploration. I want to give you a chance to practice empathy and honesty with each other. And so everybody gets a chance to express. So we're going to go back to small groups. And I'm going to have to make a few little
I have them
adjustments.
all organized, Jim.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. Well,
Jim, can you put that slide just for one more second?
the last one, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
What I don't have, Jim, is the time frame, which you know is not my strongest suit.
Yeah, so let's
How
go.
long would you like
go
the
for-
breakout room to be?
Let's go for 15 minutes. 15, 1-5.
Okay.
And Jim, can you go one slide back too?
Yeah, I'll stay here for 10 seconds, then I'll go back.
And while people are listening there, I just also want you to know if you came in late, it'll take me a bit to readjust you into a room.
I'm not clear on what the authoring is.
Authoring would be like you're taking responsibility, response-ability for authoring your own life. You become your own agent. You're the writer of your life. You're the creative cause would be another way of looking at it.
Does
that make sense?
Internal locus of control.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have the ability.
Okay, is that good,
Okay.
Rob and Zohar?
Thanks.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll open up the rooms again. If you came in late, I'll put you into a room ASAP. And we'll see you. What was that, Jim? We said 15 minutes with an
Yeah.
extra minute,
15
correct?
minutes with an extra minute, right?
Great. All right. See you later. See you soon. And welcome back. And trying. Welcome back to the main room. I'd love to hear any insights anyone has. Rob?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I don't know, maybe it was said in the teachings, but I have a little bit different recollection of this triangle. How like as a rescuer, you become like the victim because you're expecting, thanks for rescuing them and stuff like that. And it doesn't come your way. And so you go to a third part of the triangle. Does that ring any bells, Jim?
It does. It does. We're not stuck in any one role. I think Aviva put that in the chat too. She said something like
You don't have to take responsibility for the same role over and over.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how it relates to self-responsibility or awareness of responsibility for me is that we can continue, as we continue to work with NVC skills and self-connection, empathy and honesty, we can contact more power, more of our own shared power, and start advocating for the world that we want to live in. Yeah. Thanks, Rob. Does that feel complete for you?
Well, I was just going to say, rescuer seems almost a little bit pushy and kind of authority or something. So we're supporting is totally, contributing kind of a thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Rather than staying stuck in a label, we actually get connected to the needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What else anybody else want to share what you're taking away or what you're chewing on after being here today? Go ahead, Zohar.
I through the exercise, I could see how being in the position of the victim is actually like a cover to a lot of judgments that I can have on others and also on myself. And that this is like a shelter that I can build to myself so I don't so I'm not in a place where I need to get punished, that I deserve a punishment, that I need empathy, that I need love, that I need somebody to open their wings over me and shelter me so I won't be in that position of being punished.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Makes sense. I feel inspired hearing that. Yeah. Somebody else want to share yeah, go ahead, Juliana.
Jim, I just want you to first please clarify what you meant by, I don't know if I'm quoting you right. So we support behaviors that occur rather than the labels or the roles. I don't know if I'm quoting you right. Something like that you ended with. The
Yeah.
Marshall kind of one kind of tells us that.
Yeah, I wanted, I want to shift my focus. I don't know about other people, but I want to shift my focus from labeling people to connecting to the needs met by behaviors.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then I noticed for myself, Jim, that I may choose to be in a victim role because for my own peace of mind in a conflict. Okay, really. That is not opening my mouth and speaking my truth. And I'm so afraid that when I do open my mouth and speak my truth, that I should not then become the perpetrator, so that the other person is ready to receive what I'm saying is so important. And so the person is able to receive what I'm saying. I'm talking about I hold back on speaking my truth and I, get into the victim role. So any comments on that, please?
Oh yeah, I resonate with that. And I think you're actually pointing to how we can, how we fall into the same fairy tale if we think that we can, that our honesty can hurt somebody else's feelings. And that if we take care and have some mutuality, like you were just talking about, check out to see if the other person wants to have this conversation right now. And that we show up with warmth and compassion and curiosity, that then we can find a way to communicate about our own unmet needs and find a way to connect with how it might be affecting other people, and give everybody the freedom to take responsibility for their own direct experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, but then, and what resonated just now is that even after I share my truth, I can also always care for the impact by saying, how was it for you to hear what I said? Asking that question. So this is how I can care for the impact.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Juliana. Exactly. I'm going to go to River next and then Siva. Go ahead, River.
So I just want to check my understanding of the reference of authoring. And I wonder if this is close to what's meant. This last winter in Philadelphia, there was a freezing rainstorm and I was out walking afterward, and I was walking so carefully. I had to hang on so I wouldn't slip and hurt myself. And I go by a bus stop. There's a few people gathered, and a man says, "Careful." My habitual response from being a little toddler was irritation and rage. I have a story that came up. What a critical so-and-so. And then a moment later, I thought of another story. Maybe he was saying, "Hey, buddy, I care about you. I hope you don't hurt yourself." I wonder if that's what he meant by the story. And I chose to stay with that interpretation. Is that something like what you mean by authoring?
Exactly. Finding out where our choice is and living from that choice, writing a new story rather than falling into our old habit. Thank you, River. That's exactly it.
Thank you.
Siva, and then Juan. Oops, can't hear you yet, Siva.
I'm struggling with the question I saw Aviva put in the chat, and maybe River has a partial answer. And that the question was, what if people are really victims? You know, people, River could have fallen down, and the man who said careful said, I told you so, you weren't careful. Or, you know, people are victims, and how can we help them with that when they really, really are victims?
For me, this is one of the most important gifts of MVC, that we have empathy, that we can hold them as whole human beings, even as they may feel like a victim, so that they can connect to their efficacy, that they can be, they can stand again and feel the wholeness of themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Juan?
And then we'll go to Juan.
Thank you. I have a question about rescue and supporter. Sometimes, for example, my husband, and within my husband, my kids and me, if my kids want to talk to my husband, he's afraid to talk. So I kind of help. So kind of like my husband have power like a prosecutor, and my kids have less power like victim. So I feel like I just support him to speak up what they want. And at the same time, I feel like I'm a rescuer, kind of I speak up for them, and then they did not really talk by themselves. So I just not sure at that moment, in that situation, am I a rescuer or am I a supporter?
Yeah, I love your question, and I think only you know the answer, right? I mean, ultimately, you're the one. And what I would, if I were you, what I would wanting to do would be to connect to needs rather than labels. And so I think I just want to celebrate this beautiful need in you to move towards contribution, especially in the midst of conflict. That's a beautiful, beautiful need. And when we live from that awareness of needs, then we're much more likely to make life wonderful, because we're going to be motivated by trying to feed needs rather than to be a role or something like that. And the other thing I would say would be that there's such power, shared power in what you do. Anytime any of us plays the role of a third sider, like a mediator or something like that, just another human presence changes the system. And so I love that your presence likely supports everybody in finding more of their zero step, their calm center, in order to navigate the conflict. Does that make sense, Xuan?
Yeah, it's very much. Thank you so much. When you said connect to my needs instead to label myself, that's really resonated me. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Yeah, once Jory and I were we were out on a bike ride. This is back when we lived in Albuquerque, and we were riding our bike, and we ended up down by the park, which is about a half a mile from our house, and there was a dispute going on between a man and a woman, and it appeared to be like a domestic dispute. I have no idea, but maybe boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, and they were yelling and screaming at each other, and Jory and I got really concerned that violence might happen, because violence sometimes did happen in this park. And so Jory and I had just read a book called The Third Sider that Marshall had recommended. And so we decided to play the role of third and fourth sider in this case, and we just started riding around in circles around them so that they knew there was another human being present. And that changed the whole energy. Within maybe 3 minutes, the energy came down 50%. The man got into his car and drove away. And so no violence occurred. That might have happened anyway, but I have a feeling that our presence as third-siders mattered and contributed to peace. So that's why I'm excited about all of you continuing to learn NVC, because you are now all third-siders. Even if all you are is present in the midst of a conflict, you'll be making a big difference. So we're at the point in the meeting where I usually say a few things. One is we have a mailing list. If this is your first time here and you want to get reminders of what we do, I'll put the link into the chat. This is how you can join our mail list. We usually have recordings for our meetings. I never did last week because there was a little technical problem I'm still working on last week, but eventually they'll be here at that link. We do all of our work in the spirit of compassionate giving and receiving. Our first preference is that you give money directly to the nonprofit that Marshall started. Oops, that didn't go. Which is the Cultus
And
Center.
if you do that, we appreciate if you let us know, since we pay a certain fee to be part of the Center for Nonviolent Communication. So it becomes part of our payment there too. So let us know.
Also because we want to celebrate your gift. Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to give to CNVC for whatever reason, then you can just give the money to us. We'll pay the taxes on it and then pay it forward to an NVC project. Just gave some money this week, last week, to support some training for people in some Ukrainian and Russian certification candidates. Also, and finally, I wrote a book called Pathways to Liberation. I'm sorry, Pathways to Nonviolent Communication. And you can buy that. Gosh, why is it doing that? You can buy the book anywhere where books are sold. And my preference is that you buy it at your local mom and pop bookstore and order it there. They know how to order these things, but here's a link for getting free international shipping on the book as well. Next week, we are going to cover the final class in this series called Supporting Holistic Systems, where now we're going to combine all 27 skills that we've been working on for the last 6 months and use them to help Marshall fulfill his dream of life-connected, life-enriching social change so that more needs can be met at less cost around the world and we can have more peace and less war. So that's next week. Then we'll have to decide what we do after that. And if you have a vote, if you have a request, then please write to Jim and Jory at radicalcompassion@gmail.com and make a preference, state your preference about what we do next. We could start all over and go through it again. I see some nodding heads. That we could take some of the classes that had the most interest and go a little deeper with them. So we'll find something fun to do. We could also do the 9 skills and then bring it into more practical everyday activities. So we'll wait for some feedback from you, and then we'll decide what we'll do. I'm seeing a lot of support for the idea of starting over again, which makes sense to me because not everybody was here at the beginning.
And not only that, but it takes a while to integrate so many different things. So
yeah,
I like that idea too.
Yeah, plus I already got now 28 classes prepared. I can be lazy giraffe. Although I have so much fun getting ready for these classes and coming up with new exercises. I'm not totally satisfied with today. I would have liked to figure out ways to make it more interactive. So if you have suggestions about that, I would really like to hear how to do that. This is a really tricky topic. So if any of you are trainers or have other ideas about fun, interactive ways to explore taking responsibility, self-responsibility, that would be really rich for me.
And I also like what Isa wrote, 9 skills first and then 28, just to kind of break it up. And so that's another possibility.
So we
That's
will,
9 skills. For those of you who don't know what the 9 skills are, they're 9 skills for navigating conflict.
yeah, they're basically 5 skills of these 28, only we really go deep with them and have lots of practice. So we always hang out here at the end for an after party. So if you want to stay and do some more practice, do some more connecting, just have some social time, Jory will make small groups of 3 or 4. And you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. We understand a lot of you are tired and ready to go. And that's also fine. So whatever, you get to be the author of your own experience now and choose your own adventure. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much for coming to play with us. And thanks for being here, River and Siva and all of you. I really enjoyed having your presence. Aloha.
Aloha.